And I'm not really sure how we transition away from football
Yeah,
into
really.
space power and the
You
space
you can
fleet.
you can
But
hear the gears grinding as we okay, now
oh
to
my
space
gosh,
power.
it's so rough. It's
Yeah,
such a rough
really. But
transition.
yes, it is. But I'm
No,
sure
but
you're
this
up to it.
this is super exciting because on our last conversation, we were just getting to know each other, and I think to a certain degree, it takes it takes some time to really better understand people's style and presentation and how you vibe back and forth during a conversation. And now I'm like, okay, I feel like Dr. Lockwood and I are really good friends. Now we can really address these particular topics properly and in a way that I feel like is going to be really enjoyable for the audience as well. So I'm excited
Right.
about that part. You get a very authentic side of me now. This is me relaxed with other people, to say the least.
And this is me powered by a little bit extra coffee
Yeah, I love
prepared
it.
by my wife. So
I love it. So we've discussed the diving into to space, specifically the space fleet, space theory, space power, and a lot of those things are going to be discussed tonight. I did mention, though, that I wanted to hit on some current events for a few minutes before we dive into that. So I want to bring up the situation in Venezuela. I've had a lot of conversations as of late with friends that seem to see all of the strikes on cartel and drug boats, and that is what is portrayed in the media right now very heavily by our government. But I don't think the majority really understands our reason for being around Venezuela. And personally, I have a feeling that it's a lot more about the oil than anything else. So I would like to dive into this and kind of just better understand your thoughts on the current situation in Venezuela before we dive into space power.
well, the oil that Venezuela produces, I would tend to disagree about it being so much about the oil,
Okay.
because Venezuela's oil that is produced is of the heavier, what they call heavy sour oil.
Okay.
It is not it is not the prime oil, the light sweet crude that we in places like Saudi Arabia and the United States produce, which is much more useful for oil exports. And Venezuela has a certain amount of leverage, but not so much. It's not like we crave their oil. What it's not quite like that. It's a combination of based on the recently published national security strategy that the Trump administration is reasserting the force of the Monroe Doctrine, which stipulates that Monroe says the United States will not tolerate foreign interference in its hemisphere or colonial adventures. And so the United States and that reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine is very much in accordance with President Trump's America First policy. If you want to characterize a grand strategy, America First would be the core of the grand strategy. The United States has to maintain the priority of its security. It will not expend its power. It will not sacrifice its national security and safety for the sake of protecting other nations. First, it has to protect itself in order to be able to be a secure base of power to then assist other nations as needed. It first has to maintain control of its own hemisphere and prevent foreign interference or adventurism in its own backyard. And that is why it is using its fleet, because the United States Navy still dominates the world's oceans. I mean, China is emerging as a potential sea denial threat. Yeah, not global sea control, because the Chinese simply don't have the capability for doing that. But the United States Navy, in order to maintain global trade, secure sea lanes, and be able to project power reliably anywhere in the world that it needs to, they need to maintain control of the seas. And the U.S. Navy right now, it has essentially uncontested control of the waters around Venezuela. So it can exercise its power, and it has the option of, for example, making an amphibious or airborne landing if it needs to in Venezuela in order to take out the centers of power or destroy the drug cartels if it has identified where their locations are. So the United States holds all the main cards, and President Trump wants to exercise that power to reduce ostensibly to reduce the flow of illegal drugs from fentanyl into our country. And they also want to demonstrate to the rest of the world that we are going to maintain our control of the Western Hemisphere, and there better not be any other nation trying to gainsay us. So that would be the main thing. So it would not surprise me if the United States used some form of military power to make sure that the power of the cartels is destroyed in Venezuela. That would be the main goal. And it also sends a message to the rest of the world that yes, just as in Iran, the United States is prepared to use military power to number one, secure its own control of its hemisphere, but also, as in the case of Iran, destroy a potential nuclear power and prevent it from threatening Israel, whom we regard as one of our major allies.
A benefit of this, though, would be regaining the ability to trade have access to oil in Venezuela would be a benefit. Not saying it's everything to your point, but it would be a benefit.
It would be a minor benefit. It'd be a nice side benefit.
Okay.
If in fact we destroy the drug cartels and Venezuela, the leadership of Venezuela, presumably the leadership after Maduro, concluded that I think it would be a very good idea for us to do business with the United States and maintain peaceful relations and not try to do things that would severely irritate the political leadership, such as exporting fentanyl or other drugs to the United States.
Right, and her name's escaping me, but the opposition leader currently, I'm assuming that is an end goal of ours as a country, is to get her into power at this time. Is that the end goal?
If that would, I hesitate to my opinion, if she were to gain power as a result of U.S. military action, the current political leadership would look on that favorably. And they said it's not a specific effort to do it. They are more interested in destroying the power of Maduro than they are to actively promoting the opposition leader. The opposition leader would obviously step into the power vacuum once Maduro is out of the picture.
Right. On a comedic note, his PR team has been working overtime as of late.
Which PR team?
Yeah. Whoever supports him, I don't know, but the videos are comical.
Of Maduro, you mean?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Hey, some comedy some of our comedians could have a real field day with those.
Yep. Yeah. I'm specifically referring to the videos of him dancing and singing, and his. I'm not sure if you've seen those or not.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
You got to keep in mind the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights prohibits the imposition of cruel or unusual punishment. Maduro dancing would probably fall under that.
Then it should be stripped from the internet, but it is all over the place. It is all over the place.
Wonderful.
Well, that's I appreciate that. I think a lot of people liken it to that I'm seeing once again, not myself, but a lot of people liken it to the Iraq War, and feel as though we're being pulled into another Iraq situation. So, how does this maybe differ from
this?
That?
Differs because Venezuela does not have a major power next to it that can keep it in the fight. It simply does not have. It does not have the resources. And there is no other naval power which could intervene against the United States in the oceans around Venezuela, in the Caribbean. There is no other serious naval, but no other power in the world can project power into the United States Western Hemisphere in a way that could meaningfully distract or prevent us from taking military action as needed against Venezuela. That simply can't happen. So in that sense, Venezuela is strategically isolated. The rest of the South American continent is not going to rally to Venezuela's defense.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of other, you mentioned China's Navy earlier. Have you seen those videos recently of the Chinese shipping vessels or fishing vessels that all swarm off the coast of South America to fish together in certain locations? Have you seen that? They're still technically in international waters, but they're right outside of the borders of those countries. But in and of itself, that might be the closest the Chinese Navy
It would like
has.
to be Chinese to opportunistically try to stir things up. That's more a symbolic projection of economic power And it really isn't that much of that. It's just they're just being predatory and just trying to take advantage of whatever resources they can get.
Understood. Understood. Well, that I appreciate that portion of the conversation. Once again, we could discuss that for an entire episode, but tonight's episode is not about that specifically.
Nice.
So as we start to dive into the space fleet and space power and everything else, I want to start off with the Golden Dome, because you've now mentioned the Golden Dome a good bit, and I think this is probably the best place for us to start, is to discuss the Golden Dome, what the Golden Dome is, which we briefly hit on in the last episode. But then use that as a great starting point for the rest of our space fleet and space power conversation.
Yeah. Well, the Golden Dome, as currently postulated by the Trump administration, the way they presented it as the fulfillment or the actual deployment, planned deployment of what used to be referred to back in Ronald Reagan's time as the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. In March 1983, President Reagan gave his speech on the Strategic Defense Initiative, which came to be known or called the Star Wars speech. And in this, the aim of the Strategic Defense Initiative was to look at ways for our scientists to find ways to render nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Now, the Soviet reaction to that, the Russian reaction to that, was sheer panic. Because I was doing my research for my first book, The Soviet View of U.S. Strategic Doctrine. And at that time, I was overjoyed because my first book came out in March, April 1983. And right at the same time, that was when Reagan gave his Star Wars speech. I was advocating strategic defense as well as space-based defense in my first edition. So I was the first one out there really talking about strategic defense for the United States. So this is very interesting. And I looked at the Russian reaction, the Soviet reaction to the Star Wars speech. And again, they were panicked. They saw SDI as, you have to keep in mind, the Soviet Union themselves had a declared strategic doctrine based upon nuclear warfighting, nuclear war survival, and the concept of achieving meaningful political victory in a nuclear war. Now, did they actually have that capability? No. But for political reasons, the Soviet leadership found it unacceptable that the capitalists could paralyze the world socialist revolution merely by threatening to unleash a nuclear war. And so, for political reasons and their own ideological survival, the Soviet Union, in their opinion, had to be able to fight, survive, and win a nuclear war with the United States. And the chief means of doing that was having a very large nuclear missile arsenal, which they eventually reduced to some extent, but this was the immediate effect. They had to work on a nuclear war survival strategy centered mainly on civil defense shelters and that sort of thing. But they tried to, and they had an anti-ballistic missile defense system, the Galosh, built around Moscow, 64 anti-ballistic missiles, which they still have. But that is their means the only means they have of surviving a nuclear war with the United States. But for them, all of their security rested upon their nuclear missile arsenal. And here comes President Reagan declaring SDI. That, to them, threatened to neutralize the one thing that made the Soviet Union a great power and enabled it to exert political pressure on the West and the United States, their nuclear missile arsenal. Anything that threatens the effectiveness of that nuclear missile arsenal, such as ballistic missile defense, was to be feared and prevented at all costs. So, the Soviets have always feared the technological potential of the United States to neutralize the one thing that makes them a great power. So, that started with SDI, and they looked for any indications that the United States was deploying a ballistic missile defense. And for one thing, when I was a brigade intelligence officer in 10th in Germany in 1985, my brigade commander asked me, he says, "Jonathan, you read those Russian military journals. Why don't you look in those journals and see if you can find if the Russians are saying anything about Patriot?" Okay, so I did. And as good fortune would have it, in the January 1985 issue of Vestnik Protivovzdushnoi Obrony, which is Herald of Anti-Aircraft Defense, I looked in that journal and I saw an article in the back on U.S. medium to high altitude air defense systems. And I combed through that article, and this is in Cyrillic, okay? So, yeah, this is painful, for me, painful translation. I'm going through, and eventually I got to the last third of the article, and were talking, it was clear they were talking about the Patriot system. I recognized the acronyms, and moreover, then, the author used a very strange acronym, PRO, which stands for in Russian, Protivoraketnoy Obrony, anti-missile defense. He was declaring that Patriot was an anti-missile defense system intended for the strategic defense of the United States. Now, we never said anything about that, and at that time, it was not even publicly known that Patriot had an ABM capability. So I knew it because I was talking to the contractors, and the contractors said, yes, Patriot has a rudimentary anti-missile defense. It's capable of protecting itself from missile attack, mainly short-range missile attack. But again, I knew this, but the Patriot did not even publicly display an ABM capability that it could do this until in September 1987. It successfully intercepted a U.S. Lance missile as a demonstration. Yes, Patriot can intercept another missile. And that's as far as it went. But the Russians were scared to death of Patriot. They were obsessed with it. And they saw it as having great potential. Their suspicions were proven in the Persian Gulf War when we sent Patriots over to help defend against potentially ballistic missile attacks against Israel, when Saddam Hussein was firing Scuds at Israel. And the Patriot, they sent an improved version of Patriot. They had to kind of improvise to make sure that it could intercept a Scud, because that was technically beyond the envelope of the Patriot's radar. It was the most brilliant bit of improvisation I'd ever seen. They used the U.S. Defense Satellite System to identify when a missile was launched. Then they would instruct the Patriot battery commanders, or send messages, the missiles coming will appear in this portion of the sky. Point your radars in that direction. And that gave the Patriot's computer time to see the missile coming and then plot an intercept course, fire the Patriot, and intercept the Scud. Wow. Brilliant bit of improvisation. Oh. And it scared the Russians even more. And since then, during all these years, Raytheon has steadily improving the efficiency of the Patriot system. Till now, in the recent Ukrainian war, when we sent Patriots to Ukraine, those Patriots were intercepting nearly 100% of the missiles that were fired. So it's incredible for the improvement of the Patriot system, adapting over time. Patriot was originally intended to be the ultimate aircraft killer, not a missile killer. So it's a great example.
The Patriot defense system is exactly what Israel has currently, correct?
Say again?
The Patriot defense system is the exact same system that Israel has currently.
Their Iron Dome, which the Golden Dome is, their Iron Dome is, the Golden Dome was perceived as an imitation or an extension of the Iron Dome.
Right.
The problem, where the problem is, and a lot of people have recognized this. The Iron Dome has a simpler problem than the United States has. The Iron Dome only has to worry about intercepting intermediate range missiles which do not really go outside the Earth's atmosphere or have a very high arc. Israel can intercept those missiles very reliably. And so, but with the Golden Dome, the United States has to intercept intercontinental range ballistic missiles, which go outside of Earth's atmosphere, have a very high arc, and would normally bypass and be very difficult for the ballistic missile defense systems that we have now, which are hit to kill. Right. Make it very difficult. So and the way the current contractors and all these other people are talking, they're talking about deploying hundreds of satellites in space to be able to intercept these missiles. There's a problem with that, and I know about that problem because of my participation in the January 1997 Army After Next Winter War Game, and I can explain that for these.
Yep,
Provide
please do.
you some back. Right. The Army After Next Winter War Game was I participated in it when I was a contractor, and I volunteered through this other contractor to participate in the war game on the red team, representing Russia. And so I became part of the bad guys for that war game. And the war game was the first strategic level free play war game. Now, a free play war game is very different from most war games that have been previously conducted. When the military conducts war games, they use it to test the operational effectiveness of their systems. They have a script. Events proceed this way, and it's designed to test how well your systems work. They were not designed to predict the potential outcome of a conflict. That's because you follow the script, the bad guys lose or whatever, but you see how well your systems work. In this case, they wanted to find out how well the projected U.S. military technology, which we now have and is deployed, how well it would work in a potential war in 2020. So we had a war game that Booz Allen and Hamilton had written the script, the scenario for it. It takes all the actors up to a certain point of the war game, and then the war game starts, and the actors can do what they want to do. They don't have to follow a script. So in this case, I was on the red team, and we were looking at the situation. And in previous test war games, blue, the United States, had been mopping up the field with red based on its technology, based on its superiority in space. They were using their satellites very effectively, and basically red did not have a chance. And I was looking at this, and I briefed the red team leader that said everything that we have seen is that the blue is relying on its space superiority, unchallenged space superiority, to be able to effectively. If we do not make as our first act of the war a preemptive strike in space with our laser systems that we were given in the war game, if we do not make a preemptive strike against their communications and intelligence satellites, we are going to lose. But if we make the preemptive strike, take out their satellites, we will slow them down at the very least, and it will give us time to invade Ukraine, because we saw Ukraine in that scenario as the bigger threat. Because in that war game, there were U.S. military advisors in Ukraine. That was an even more existential threat than anything else. And so we first take out the U.S. satellites, slow them down. That gives us time to invade Ukraine. What happened in the war game, we launched that preemptive strike in space, and blue could not move. They were paralyzed. And the war game controllers told us in the red team that absent intervention by the war game controllers, red had just won the war. And so, wow. And the result among the war game controllers and the people sponsoring the war games was panic. Again, panic. The bad guys aren't supposed to win a war game. That's unheard of. There were millions, if not billions of dollars of contracts at stake. They were relying on the validation that would be demonstrated by the success of this war game by Blue to go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Let's get these contracts and let's build that system. But this just upset the apple cart. And so, what do you think the war game controllers did? They cheated. They cheated. They restarted the war. They said, oh, the referees basically said, oh, those red strikes in space weren't as effective as projected. So they reset the war game, and they kept fighting with the same combat values as if Blue had not suffered any losses at all.
Before we proceed on this,
Yeah.
I want to make a comment about the controllers themselves. I'm not sure who they were exactly,
Right.
but it sounds like special interest had a huge
Yes.
role in this.
there behind the scenes,
And
the
this has been a hard conversation with individuals in my life and in my realm recently to be critical of ourselves and our government. It's okay to be critical of ourselves and our government to continue to make ourselves better, right? But these things
that's true.
happen all of the time. And I was like, we are not perfect. We are still humans. It is
Yeah.
okay to be critical of ourselves and our allies. But I just wanted to make that comment because it's been heavy on my heart as of late that for whatever reason, if you're critical of yourself and your country and your people, somehow you don't love your country anymore. I'm like, that's
Well, I
very
do
far
love
from
my.
the truth.
Believe me, I do love my country because I was saying to the and it gets more interesting here because we launched this preemptive strike in space, and I witnessed all the blue controllers, the blue players running around like their anthill had just been kicked, and I walked into the red team room and I said, "Glorious, brothers, glorious!" Like I felt like a Klingon that had just kicked the
Did
Federation.
you open a bottle of vodka as well?
Or, we should have. We really should have. All of us in that red team, we were Russia experts.
Yeah.
They recruited a bunch of Russia experts, and we were all just saying, "Yes, we nailed their butts." And so, we were celebrating. But then the war game controllers reset the war game, and it says that, and the red president, our leader, he was furious. He said, "This is a whitewash. They're just simply trying to justify, these contracts based upon tinkering with the results."
Right.
And he looked at me. He says, "Can you do something about this?" And I said, "Let me check." I went over to our people who were controlling our ASATs, anti-satellite weapons. And I said, "Okay, how many anti-satellite weapons do we have left?" They said 30. I said, "Good. Put high-yield nuclear warheads on them. Put them in orbit." We put 30 ASATs in the war game in orbit. And then we detonated them all simultaneously. I had spoken about this before when I was a guest on the G. Gordon Liddy radio show back in June 2000. And Gordon was absolutely astonished. I said, when you detonate 30 nuclear weapons in low Earth orbit, you get lots and lots of something called electromagnetic pulse. And it essentially, in the war game, it fried all the satellites, everything.
We also you destroy it, but you're messing with the magnetic field around
Yes.
the Earth.
Yeah.
So when you get rid of that,
In the war game, effectively the war game controllers in Nevada says, "Okay, space is useless. You just fried. You probably charged the Van Allen radiation belt and made space useless for an indefinite period of time." And then the others said, "Why did you do that? Now you can't use space either." And our reply to Blue and the war game controllers was, "It hurts you more than it hurts us, because you rely much more on control of space to execute your military strategy." And in the after-action report, the immediate after-action report, they recognized that the nuclear attacks in space took us back to 1950 in terms of technology. So it was publicized that the results of that war game were publicized in Aviation Week in Space Technology and in the Army Times. I wrote a couple of editorials on the effects and the lessons of the Winter War Game and how there was a growing vulnerability in space because we were assuming that we would always have uncontested control of Earth orbital space. Now, another thing to keep in mind, in that war game, there was no space fleet, no space force. They didn't even envision the existence of a space force in that war game. So what was fascinating about it, now the Russians had talked about having a space fleet as early as 1990 and probably before. Their concept of a space fleet was having space units and subunits in orbit with weapons capable of destroying Earth installations from space.
right.
That was the Russian concept of a space force. Why don't they have a space force? They don't have the resources. They don't have the ability to deploy a space fleet. They do have the ability to deploy satellites, what we call counter space weapons, weapons capable of destroying other satellites, just like in the 1997 war game. They have a counter space, a space denial capability. So do the Chinese. So what happens is if you put satellites, you have Russian and Chinese counter space satellites on one side, and you've got U.S. satellites intended to be part of the Golden Dome on the other side, guess what you have? You have a very unstable, hair-trigger situation in space. In effect, you have a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit,
Yeah.
which the side that fires first has the decisive advantage.
Right.
And that's the hidden flaw in the Golden Dome. What we are setting ourselves up for is a 21st century version of the Maginot Line. Just like the French thought they were going to block the Germans and avoid the mistakes of World War I,
Right.
they put their faith in the Maginot Line, and the Germans simply found a way to bypass it. That was the hidden flaw in the Maginot Line. In this case, in the 21st century, if we construct the Golden Dome and we do not have a reliable means of destroying the Russian and Chinese counterspace satellites, we are setting ourselves up for a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit and a potential, ironically enough, a potential Pearl Harbor in low Earth orbit.
Right. So do we have nuclear warheads in space already?
Do we have nuclear warheads in space? I would say no. We do not have nuclear warheads in space. The Russians are suspected, according to one congressman, of having an anti-satellite weapon with a nuclear warhead on it. I cannot prove or deny the truth of that.
Do we have lasers in space already on these satellites?
Do we have lasers? Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
We should.
Okay.
Now here comes the. But if you're going to put lasers on satellites, you better make sure that they can't be destroyed themselves by a preemptive strike. How do you prevent that? That's where the space fleet comes in.
Right. So I won't name names here because obviously that would not be beneficial to
Kosher.
anybody. But for about the past, I would say it was about 10 years ago, a good friend of mine, whose father was very involved in the military, made it very clear that we already had nuclear weapons in space. And I don't. Once again, you talked about these space games and everything else that running these war game scenarios. It seems very likely that it's already happened, whether we had the nukes in space and then took them out of space or left them there. But it seems very likely that we already did. Whether or not we're going to say that on this podcast, it seems very likely that we've already had nuclear weapons in space previously.
Yeah, we might have been in theory testing the concept of what's called a fractional orbital bombardment system, FOBS. I remember reading about that in the late 60s, and that was a very dangerous concept. You have a nuclear weapon in space, and you decide on a moment's notice to use it on a foreign power. That would be that would have provoked a general nuclear war.
Right.
And I would say that we need the way you neutralize the other side's nuclear arsenal without creating a hair-trigger situation in low Earth orbit is you have to have a space fleet that would be armed with lasers, not nuclear weapons. That space fleet with lasers could destroy any nuclear missile that was launched in its boost phase while it is on its way up. That's how you plug the hole in the Golden Dome. You have to use lasers in Earth orbit that can destroy those nuclear missiles before they reach Earth orbit and can deploy decoys. So this becomes, and how do you do that? Where do you get the space fleet from? Well, there's a little company called SpaceX, and that Elon Musk has been building these starships that ostensibly the purpose of the starships, he wants to get to Mars. He wants to build he wants to build thousands of starships to move a population to Mars. And I would say to Elon, you're getting a little ahead of yourself there. There is a crucial intermediate step that you need to have. You need to be able to secure Earth orbit and make it peaceful so that nobody else can threaten to destroy the global economy or other things, which would render your efforts to get to Mars totally useless and counterproductive.
Well, Dr.
So you
Lockwood,
have, yeah.
maybe I'm way out in left field on this one, but maybe the goal is Mars. The vision is Mars long term. But the reason he's had this vision for Mars is to really hype people up and get people excited to support the company, with the understanding that it's actually more so for defense purposes and to support the United
That
States of
could well
America.
be, yeah. And I say it would be a very clever. It would be a very clever way by getting people excited about Mars, because any spacecraft that is capable, like a starship, that is ostensibly designed to get to Mars, is perfectly capable of carrying out the missions of a space fleet in low Earth orbit and on the Moon. It can, and with far fewer starships. In my concept,
Yep.
you would have about 12, a good starter fleet, shall we say?
This was my follow up. My next question was, what does your ideal space fleet look like? So I'm glad we're going there.
The ideal space fleet would be 12 starships, starting with 12 starships, and they would be allocated as follows. You would have 2 starships that would go to the Moon to establish a lunar base, and you could rotate those starships between them and low Earth orbit. And so those two, that establishes the lunar base, assists the Artemis project. It has multiple uses. Once you have a base on the Moon, you can even take the space fleet, the two other starships out of the R-12 would be in geosynchronous orbit, far out from, not low Earth orbit. They would be in fixed positions. Those 2 geosynchronous starships could aid in, monitoring the sun. They could also be in position to take action to block asteroids, meteors, or comets that threaten to collide with Earth. It would give you early warning. It gives you more choices. You don't have to just sort of sit there and say, gee, I hope that thing doesn't hit us, because it's pretty much what we're limited to doing now.
Yeah.
So that gives you another option. The remaining 8 would be in low Earth orbit, equally spaced. Just picture 45 degrees apart. Each starship orbiting provide a continuous circle of starships. All 8 of those starships would be armed with lasers, as well as other surveillance equipment. The stuff you would normally put on satellites, you would put that surveillance equipment on the starships. And that takes its inspiration, by the way, from an old Star Trek episode, Assignment Earth. In that episode, if your viewers go and watch that, you see Scotty in the transporter room, and he's looking at a monitor, and he is monitoring the Saturn launch site from the Enterprise. That's because the Enterprise contains the surveillance equipment that normally you would have to put on satellites. And the same concept operates here. You have that surveillance equipment on all 8 of these starships. They're armed with lasers. If they detect a launch, you would always have a starship in range, 1 or 2 starships in range, to engage that missile and destroy it. That is how you perfect the Golden Dome. You combine starships with satellites, not just satellites. You combine both, and you have a virtually impenetrable nuclear defense against nuclear attack. And by the way, both President Putin and President Xi have issued a statement where they said that they considered the Golden Dome to be destabilizing. Well, no kidding. But it's not destabilizing to their existence. The Golden Dome would be part of what I call the worldwide strategic defense matrix, which is designed to neutralize the nuclear arsenals of our adversaries. And my motto that I've created for wisdom, WSDM, wisdom does not kill. And it doesn't. It simply destroys nuclear missiles. Wisdom does not kill. And they would be trying to, they can't truly object to it on the basis that it threatens their existence. The Golden Dome and wisdom, it does not threaten their existence. It threatens their power.
Right.
It threatens their ability to intimidate the rest of the world with their nuclear arsenals. So by neutralizing those weapons and by making space safe and useful to the rest of the world, the Space Force would assume the same mission as the U.S. Navy does for controlling and protecting the world's oceans. that would make Trump's national security strategy of American First very effective, because the Trump administration would then, with these systems and with this strategy, would have dominance of seas and space. Would be a global sea power, and we would be a global space power.
How far out do you think we are from this actually happening?
Okay, yeah. One of my compatriots on another on the Ukraine show, he says, "Oh, the Golden Dome will take many years to be construct, if it can be constructed at all." As that's just an assertion. You have no idea what the U.S. military-industrial complex is capable of once it puts its mind to it.
Right.
And what I would say is that the Golden Dome there are two goals, really, that the Golden Dome would have. There's a thing that the military calls IOC, Initial Operational Capability. That is when a system reaches a stage where, okay, it can do the basic things we require of it. That is different from FOC, Full Operational Capability. That's when it's at full strength. So the Trump administration, in carrying out the Golden Dome, they would have two milestones that they would reach. President Trump is saying that the Golden Dome will be operational by the end of his second term. Okay, what that translates into is that you must achieve initial operational capability. He's got 3 years to do it. Initial operational capability does not mean that you can block every nuclear missile. It means how you can block a certain percentage of them. It fulfills its basic functions, but you must achieve that initial operational capability, and then you continue augmenting it until it reaches full operational capability. Now, the beautiful thing about that is, once the Golden Dome reaches initial operational capability, you present your adversaries with a very thorny problem. Do we launch a nuclear attack against the United States that has initial operational capability Golden Dome? Because it introduces a great deal of uncertainty into the minds of your opponents. They don't know. If they fire nuclear missiles at the United States, they don't know how many of those missiles are going to get through. They don't know which ones will get through. What they do know is if they attack the United States, that they will be subjected to a devastating nuclear counterattack by not only the United States, but potentially all of its NATO allies. Which, when you put all those nuclear missiles together, that's a larger number than Russia has.
Right.
So, yeah, it's larger than the United States, but not by very much. It is not larger than the rest of the world put together. And with that, you would have a sound means of stabilizing Earth orbital space and the security of the United States, I would argue, for the rest of the 21st century and beyond. Realistically, until Jesus returns.
Which seems to be coming a lot sooner than...
Which could be it could happen a lot sooner than you'd think, the way things are going.
Quick aside there, what frustrates me the most, and once again, being a Christian myself, what frustrates me the most is almost like everybody is wanting to bring it in. They want Jesus to come back tomorrow, which is a beautiful thing, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's just almost like, can you just let it happen? It's going to happen. Why do we have to force it? Why do we have to want it to happen tomorrow?
You can't manipulate God.
You're correct. You're trying to manipulate God, and it's not working.
And it's arrogant. It's arrogant. God knows every thought that is in the minds of every human being on the planet.
And it's very off-putting, too. It's very off-putting when you see somebody online talking about Jesus is coming back tomorrow. And you're like, he's coming back very soon. You're like, well, you don't know that.
They forgot to look at that Bible verse where Jesus said, "No man knows the day or the hour. Only God the Father." Jesus himself, in his human incarnation while he was on earth, he did not know.
I believe in Acts that Jesus was actually ascending into the heavens and told us very clearly, you will not know, but it will occur.
It will occur. You just don't, you have to live as if he is going to come tomorrow, but think as if it's going to be a very long time before he does.
Right.
And so it's sheer arrogance for anyone to claim that they know when Christ is going to come.
Well, I appreciate
it's
you
even
more
arrogant to try and provoke it.
It seems like a lot of people are trying to provoke it right now. Everything you see online, you're like, and it's beautiful that Christianity is spreading in the way it is, but it's also like, wow, how arrogant are you to think that you know that Jesus is coming super soon? He's coming tomorrow. He's coming now. It's like we don't know. We actually don't know.
You have to, and the thing is, you have to concentrate. What we as Christians have to do, if you know that, since you know that Jesus is coming eventually, you have to realize, why hasn't he come yet? Because God is holding back to give everyone a chance to accept his Son as Savior. So you have to spend if you know that Jesus is coming, if you're convinced that Jesus is coming, then your principal job is to get the word out to all those you care about to make sure that they have accepted Christ as their Savior, so that they are ready. You don't worry about trying to provoke the second coming, because it is beyond your power to do it.
And to your point about people being arrogant as well, God is probably like, every single time you set a date of when I'm
You just ruled that date out.
just prolonged it.
Yeah, because Jesus says no man knows the date or the hour, and every time a man claims a date, you can just picture God checking. Say, well, let's check that date off. We're not.
Well,
coming
Cameron
yet.
thinks I'm coming back on December 21st. I'm definitely not coming back on December 21st. We're gonna push it another year. 2026 it is.
Yeah, exactly. Every time somebody shoots off their mouth about what date they're positive, they just assured that it's not going to happen on that date. So
Absolutely.
and so that's. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, after that was a great aside. That was fantastic. We talk about a lot of these countries and this rush to space power and to space authority across the board. It almost leads me to think about the amount of money that is missing from the Pentagon, the Department of War, Department of Defense, whatever you want to refer to it as nowadays. The $2 trillion. We haven't been able to. The Department of War has not been able to pass an audit in however many years, right? So there's all this money floating around. And you could consider
There's
government.
got to be, you know what I would, if I were the Secretary of War.
Yep.
One of the first things that I would do, and I have some people who would be able to help me do this. I would hire. You know what a forensic accountant is?
Yes.
I would hire a bunch of forensic accountants, people who are trained to find the money, track it down. And I would conduct a really extensive forensic audit of the Pentagon. Find all that money, where they've hidden it. And, okay, all of that money, all that hidden money that you've been squirreling away, okay, that's now going to go towards, and if the president gives me the authority to do this, construct the space fleet. Do other things. Do other things need fixing.
So don't you think? That's my comment though. Is if $2 trillion or however much it is missing, don't you think that money is already being used for black sites and for other government projects already that are not being discussed? And that leads me to that conversation. It's probably already being done somewhere, maybe, that we just don't hear about because it's been very compartmentalized.
Or they may be squirreling that money away against potential bad times. Where
true, very true,
as a hidden strategic reserve, which would be the most positive outcome. And,
but to be missing $2 trillion seems a bit absurd. I don't really know why we. It's like almost like why do we even pay our taxes anymore if we're just gonna lose it all? So,
and the interesting thing is with President Trump talking about his tariff success, and it remains to be seen how this is going to develop. If in fact it develops the way that President Trump envisions, and we have, because he is correct in saying that we used to, before the imposition of the federal income tax in 1913, we paid for our national expenses by tariffs.
Yep.
We had that means it is, at least in theory, possible to go back to that, but it takes a lot of work.
Right.
And it will be interesting to see how all of this plays out, despite all the sturm and drang that you see in the press. As this isn't going to possibly going to work. It reminds me of all these people at the start of the 20th century who were insisting, and this was just a few years before the Wright brothers in 1903. They were insisting that all the scientists then at the present then were saying that it was impossible for man to achieve heavier than air flight. Man will never fly. Lo and behold, what happened?
Figured it out.
We figured it out, and before you knew it, one of the Wright brothers lived to see masses of air power being used in World War II. He saw the outcome of what he had done.
Do you think at the time that people so nowadays I'm just going to bring this back up because I kind of referenced in our last conversation, last podcast, but there, UFOs, aliens, etc., introducing technology that allows us to progress at a more rapid rate. Do you think there were people at that time that were like, did an alien come down and introduce flight to the Wright brothers of some kind? Do you think that was also occurring
No.
at that time?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
don't think that it was occurring at that time. I think that what you had were exceptional people that had exceptional intellectual abilities,
Right.
who were able to make the creative leap required to introduce new innovations. And that's the way we have been progressing, by leaps and starts. Now, as far as space power goes, space power in the manner that I have described represents pretty much the limit, I would say, of what we can do in space exploration because of the limitations of our human bodies. God did not create our bodies to be able to survive in space or in low gravity. And you see all these people trying to defy our biological reality by saying, oh, we must get to Mars. We must establish a colony on Mars. People that you send to a colony on Mars are going to die because of the medical complications that will result from trying to survive in one-third gravity. Your bodies will deteriorate. I would argue that in order for humanity to eventually explore the stars and explore, you know what we will have to have? We will have to have immortal bodies, glorified bodies, bodies that will basically be redesigned by God, because that's what the Bible promises. We will have to have immortal bodies that cannot get sick, cannot deteriorate, cannot grow old, and cannot die.
A singularity of sorts.
A singularity that would be brought about by God and by the return of Jesus. And after that, after all of humanity has essentially been redesigned by God to live for eternity, never die, that is when, God, under God's careful and loving supervision, mankind will be able to finally explore the rest of God's universe. Not before. We are functioning under severe limitations. The best we can do, we can use, for example, we could use AI robots. We could use AI robots to explore Mars. We could use AI robots with starships to mine the asteroids.
So here's a
We
fun thought.
Yeah.
Just as you said that too, my thought process goes to, why get in a spaceship to go to a planet very, very far away when you could simply connect to a robot and have the experience of a robot that is going to that planet very far away while your physical body is still back on Earth?
Right, you could do that. It would be one step beyond. For example, when you're on a computer and you're in a Dungeons and Dragons type game program.
Right.
Your heroes that you've constructed are representing you in that little computer universe.
Right.
And you want your characters to survive and get more hit points and more treasures and more stuff. And so,
as creepy as that is, I feel like that's the ideal approach. If you're planning on, if you want to go to Mars and you want the experience, keep yourself here, have the AI robot,
have your avatar.
have your avatar go there. Yes.
Yeah, your avatar go there. You can explore. You can see what's going on. You can, and basically, that would become and especially if they're doing mining activities and bringing back wealth.
Right.
You can bring back those so-called rare earth minerals or whatever else you find. There's this one asteroid called Psyche, which is a Psyche. I think it's Psyche. Excuse me. That has this unbelievable concentration of gold, silver, other types of precious metals that we could theoretically mine and bring back to Earth. And one of the things that's very useful, one of the things that gold is very useful for, aside from just being a good store of value, is that gold makes a fantastic shield against space radiation. If you line a spacecraft with gold, a layer of gold in its hull, you protect against most of the space radiation. Now, the only problem is that's very pricey if you're going to build spacecrafts with gold lined in them. But it's a very useful way to to protect against the dangers of space radiation if you have enough gold. And so that it's a very useful concept. The other concept is, as we develop nuclear fusion power, one of the ways that we would be able to explore or stay in space, we have to be able to get there fast.
Right.
You have to have fusion-powered spaceships, which can cut down the transit time to Mars. Instead of being 6 to 7 months, cut it down to a week or two. Then the exploration of Mars becomes a lot more possible, because Americans or anybody else, they don't want to go to space or to Mars to die there or live there. No, 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 no. They want to go to Mars, stay there for a certain short period of time, and they want to come back and be recognized as heroes and make profit and have a better life for having gone to Mars. But the only way you do that is you have to get there fast, get back fast, and make sure that your crew does not go nuts on the journey to and from.
Right.
Because if you get inside an isolated spacecraft, I mean, Elon Musk is talking about sending people to Mars in starships. Chemically, you are not going to be able to get a crew. He envisions of 100 people on a starship. You are not going to be able to get 100 people with enough of a collective death wish to climb into a chemically powered starship, go puttering along for 6 to 7 months, because Elon Musk once said it was his wish to eventually die on Mars. Well, guess what? If he climbs into a starship with a bunch of enraged colonists, they're going to make sure he dies before he gets to Mars.
So let's just say that they do decide, because there are plenty of crazy people that would agree to go on that would traverse.
And when you have crazy people crammed into a starship, that creates problems of its own.
Well, to that comment though, you'd be like, I think I'd be a little bit nervous about the kind of person that was joining me along this voyage as well. That decided
That's right,
to say, hey,
especially in a
I've got a
confined
death wish,
space
I'm
where you
ready to
can't
go.
get away from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't think this through.
Right.
Matter of fact, they did in a sense. They should have heeded the warning. There was this one biodome. That's right. They had people.
It's been a couple of years on Earth, right?
Yes, and trying to survive in a biodome, a simulated spacecraft environment, and they found they couldn't do it. They were cheating they had to cheat in order to get them through even a semblance of the experience. Right. But in space, there's no cheating. You're stuck with what you got, and they would not be able to. So that is a warning to anyone that would try to get people. Now, here's the thing: what we should have learned is from the Star Trek episodes. In Star Trek, what does the Starship Enterprise have that enables people, even though it's a Hollywood script, what do they have that enables them to survive for long-term periods in space? Well, they have reliable food sources, they have replicators, they have normal 100% Earth gravity simulated on a starship, they have complete protection against space radiation, they have the holodecks, they have amusements, they can basically keep themselves amused and stimulated, they have their families on board. I mean, in Star Trek The Next Generation, you actually had that. But you would have to, the implied requirements of being able to survive and thrive in space are such that we are nowhere close to that. Even though the Elon Musk's starships would enable us to have a space fleet operating under certain limitations, and we could fulfill certain missions. We could clean up space junk. Those starships would be collecting space junk and transporting it to the lunar base, the lunar junkyard. And you could process all those rare earth minerals from those satellites out of those starships, from the starships.
But isn't this why, though, you would be put, you basically go to sleep for 6 months, a year, right? I mean,
even that's tricky. Your body's still deteriorating.
If you can, store yourself properly for 6 months to a year, then you'd wake up in that location, and the chambers in which they kept you, regardless, the cryo chambers or whatever it was, would actually protect you from the radiation while you're in space.
It might protect you from the radiation, and that's problematic, but it would not protect you from the lack of gravity. Your body would still deteriorate over that time, and trying to revive you by by automated control, by AI. You don't have another human who's going to be alive during that and awake at that time to be able to supervise your resuscitation. So all of that, while it sounds nice in theory, when you get right down to the practical effects of what happens in low Earth gravity with space radiation and operating a spaceship which would be piloted by an AI robot,
Right.
all of those things, there are too many things that can go wrong. And given the limitations of our human bodies, it is simply not something that we can realistically contemplate. Now, we can, if we are willing to act within the limitations of our human bodies. For example, the space fleet crew that we would have, the crew that operates those starships, it would be a combination of human beings and AI
Cyborgs.
robots. AI robots and the AI robots they'd be awake 24/7. They would be taking care of the routine maintenance. And you have starship crew members who would be operating in shifts
Right.
that would be able to maintain continuous operation. And the tour length, the length of time that those human starship members would be spending in low Earth orbit or on the moon, our experience tells us that after you can stay in space up to 1 year, but then you have to recover. You have to medically recover. That's about the limit. So the logical length of time you spend in space would be a 6-month tour for each starship member. Then they have to come back to Earth, recover. That's why you have to have other starship members who are healthy and recovered and could replace them.
Right.
And you basically change the mix of AI robots and human crew members. And that is how you would have to operate the Space Force's fleet. And it would be confined to low Earth orbit, geosynchronous orbit, the moon, until you develop sufficient technology that would enable you to undertake more ambitious things. But having the existence of a space fleet would not only perfect the Golden Dome, but it has the potential to do something very positive, neutralize the world's nuclear weapons. That does not solve every problem that we have that are facing currently, but it does transform a greater problem into a lesser problem. And that by itself is a worthwhile achievement.
You mentioned AI, and I kind of want to hit on this. I feel like this is a huge part of space exploration in general for us. What do you think the future of AI is? What role do you think AI plays in the future of space power, the space fleet, and space exploration? I know you've mentioned a number of roles, but I think it's like how quickly do we build the AI right to then be able to gain that power? So
yeah, AI is now again here for all of your viewers who are Star Trek fans. There is a very forward-looking episode in the classic Star Trek series called The Ultimate Computer. Watch that episode because it is very instructive. And that features a computer system called M5. And one of the characters asks, "So why M5? What happened to M1 through M4?" Well, the doctor who is responsible for constructing M5, he said M1 through M4 had imperfections in its ability to control a starship and perform all the functions. And Dr. Daystrom in the episode says, M5 thinks, Captain, and it conducts a completely autonomous operation. But the problem is M5 decided to make it so when it became essentially fully conscious, it started making decisions that the Enterprise did not anticipate. And I will not spoil the episode for your viewers, but you need to watch that episode. It is a warning about the dangers of AI. When you create a computer entity which is capable of operating autonomously, it may make decisions that you did not anticipate and did not like. So that is the danger. And you have to have, well, you remember the movie RoboCop?
Yep.
When he created that cyborg robot, and the company, they had Directive 4. Anytime that RoboCop threatens a member of the company, cannot act against a member of the company, it results in shutdown. You would have to, for AI to be useful, the human operators, supervisors, would have to have the equivalent of a kill switch.
Right.
to stop the AI robot from operating in case it exceeded its programming, shall we say. So AI, if you have AI operating in an isolated environment, such as in space, you could, for example, have remember those geosynchronous starships out there that would be programmed and watching to intercept and destroy comets, asteroids, and the like that are threatening Earth. You put those out there, yeah, you could have a completely AI robot crew. And they would just say, this is what you've got to watch for. You've got to warn us of this. And that is where AI would be extremely useful. AI could also be useful in low Earth orbit where you are performing routine missions such as cleaning up space junk. They can be doing that 24/7 when they're not performing the other missions of the Starfleet, of the space fleet. They would be cleaning up space junk, programming transportation routes to the moon, to the lunar base to transfer that material, and that would be an ongoing mission. It's a
It'd be a
boring
great
mission.
PR campaign too for the government to say we're cleaning
Yeah.
up space.
We're cleaning up space, and that would be a great advertisement for the space fleet. You would have you would have our best intelligent young people wanting to apply for the Space Force.
Yep.
Because now you can have a version of Star Trek in the 21st century. You would have the precursor of Star Trek, of a Star Trek universe.
Absolutely.
But you have to start somewhere with very practical, mundane missions before you get to the really glamorous stuff like trying to seek out new life and new civilizations. First, you have to clean up your own act around Earth.
That we do. That we do. I keep thinking about the moon because you referenced the moon earlier, and I shared something recently online regarding the moon being a spaceship of sorts. It was a prior CIA agent who was sharing his experience on the moon and all this other stuff, and it was very intriguing. Once again, a lot of really good clickbait. But I am curious to know your thoughts on the moon and its role in a space with the space fleet and the space force. Does it act as a base only? Does it act as more than a base? What role does the moon play with our space force moving forward?
Well, the moon plays a very convenient role in that it is a body large enough to act as a base, and it could, as some have advocated, act as a launching point for missions to Mars. It could act as a forward base and then go from there to Mars. And principally, those would be AI robots. You would manufacture those AI robots. They don't need food. They don't need water. They need power in order to be able to operate, a reliable power source. But you could use the moon as a forward base for further explorations, such as mining explorations, forward bases for, again, another forward base for watching for near-Earth asteroids, near-Earth meteors or comets, a forward warning position. It has multiple uses, and it would also act to assist NASA's desired mission of Artemis, for exploration of the moon, and it would provide useful multiple, as well as a forward base for deterring or defeating any attempt by a space denial power, such as Russia or China, that might harbor the ambition of disrupting the space control efforts of the United States. But they would face the same problem in space as they do on Earth, trying to disrupt the global dominance of the U.S. Navy.
Right.
That is why I say that current and future U.S. national security strategy must strive to maintain dominance in both sea, on the oceans, and in space, because the success and survival of the United States depends upon control of those two spheres. Air power is a useful secondary ability for the United States when it projects power. And the least important of these is, believe it or not, the U.S. Army. You don't need a large army. If you've got control of the seas and you've got control of space and you have a reasonably high-tech air force that is able to defeat other nations' attempts to dominate the air,
Right.
well then your U.S. Army, it can be much smaller. It can be armed with high-tech weaponry. It can be more efficient. But you don't have to have very large numbers. You can transfer those active duty people into the U.S. Army Reserve, where in the events that you really needed to expand the size of your army, you could then do it, being protected by the Space Fleet, the U.S. Navy, and the Air Force.
Right.
It acts as a series of shields behind which the U.S. Army could mobilize and get larger if needed. So it's a matter of, I would argue that the Trump administration has made a very good start with its national security strategy. It can be made better. It can be refined more. And it can, if it takes certain actions to, for example, correct the hidden flaw in the Golden Dome before it becomes an unpleasant reality, then it will have done very well. And so the potential exists.
So the common American, the average Joe listening to the podcast right now, is hopefully very intrigued with everything that we're discussing. I wanted to talk about the C's as well, but we're gonna avoid the C's for now because that's an entirely different conversation altogether.
Yeah, you just made an excuse for a future episode.
Yeah,
Episodes.
exactly. I mean, we could dive into the small amount of the C that we've actually discovered, which is a very small amount of the C's. But I just, whenever these conversations occur, I always think about the amount of money and the tax dollars that go into supporting these things. And I think it's really I think it's become very frustrating for the American taxpayer when we talk about going to Mars, we talk about going to the moon more, we talk about creating a space fleet, talk about doing all these things. We can't even find the $2 trillion that's missing from our current budget. And
I would be putting Mars mission on hold.
Yep.
Confine yourself to using the robots that you've got to explore the surface of Mars, get more information. That's fine. But don't try to expend trying to get people to Mars, because our bodies will not survive it.
100%. So what is kind of your message to the individual that's listening in, that's hearing all of this stuff, and is thinking to themselves, I just want things to be better on Earth, right? Before we progress into space, in the way that we are discussing, because ultimately it's a little frustrating to me too. Just deep down, I love the idea of space exploration. I want to spend all the money in the world, but it's like, but we keep throwing money at it. But as the average Joe, I feel frustrated because things aren't great here. So, what is your message to that?
My message to them is that by reorienting our priorities, accepting our limitations as human beings, but building a space fleet that has specific missions for protecting us on Earth from nuclear attack, cleaning up space junk so that our satellites can continue to improve the quality of life here on Earth, and by cleaning up space junk and doing all these other things that are confined to the Earth, control of Earth orbital space, then you not only do that, you also provide for our children an outlet for their inventiveness and creativity. If they wanted to join the Space Force, if they wanted to get into scientific endeavors, that is how you improve life on Earth. And supporting the development of a space fleet using Elon Musk's starships, that is a good intermediate way to go. Because Mr. Musk is doing our job for us, essentially. He's testing the starships.
Right.
And we could basically go to Elon and say, hey, Elon, before you build all those starships supposed to go to Mars, why don't you build at least 12, along with supporting spacecraft to resupply them in low Earth orbit on a smaller scale, to make Earth safer for its inhabitants? Because not everyone can or is going to want to go to Mars. And I'd say the number of people that would actually be willing to go to Mars under current conditions is vanishingly small.
Right.
And again, I would be given the fact that we are all morally fallen creatures, you are not going to be sending saints to Mars. Those people, oh, good Lord.
What kind of person is that?
The potential for disaster is absolutely incalculable.
So are you saying that Columbus might have also not been like the most forthright?
He had money on his mind. Okay, he had a profit motive. He wanted to make money. He just didn't want to say, "Hey, he discovered America." No, he was saying, "I made lots of money."
I mean, Elon's making a lot of money right now. So,
Yes,
yeah, to your point.
and
To your point. Very,
the thing
very
is,
valid point. Very valid point.
so he's making that, and right now he might as well use that money making capability to benefit the people of Earth,
Yep.
and he can do so by constructing the stuff needed for a space fleet, and that is the most practical use of our dollars. And then in a future episode, we might want to tackle one of the ultimate problems, the U.S. debt, which
I think we should absolutely have that conversation.
that conversation, because I saw in a recent article, which was right to the point. He said the greatest enemy of the United States is not Russia or China, it's debt.
Yep. Well, we've
That
printed
is the
of
greatest
the
threat.
250 years of existence, well, almost that we've had, we've printed 80% of the money that's been printed has been printed in the last 5 years.
That's scary.
So the question is for everybody. I mean, I'd say my generation, but like anyone that is trying to protect themselves. You're trying to figure out where to put your money. You're like, well, I need to put it into assets. I talk about this uh, at length right now with friends. Put it into something. Grab a little silver. Grab a little gold. Grab some, and I say Bitcoin too. Grab some Bitcoin. Grab a piece of real estate. Whatever you can get your hands on.
Diversify those non-dollar assets.
Right.
Set them aside, and yeah, I'll give you an example from my own childhood. When I was growing up, now I didn't get an allowance per se from my parents. What When I went to junior high school in Tampa, they had, and I believed in squeezing the eagle until it screamed, because my parents gave me in our school cafeteria, lunch cost 40 cents. You got side dish, main dish, milk, dessert for 40 cents.
Right.
However, I got that amount of money for those 5 meals a week. And of course, I got money to get on the bus and that sort of stuff. I couldn't skimp on the bus money. But I saw that the cafeteria gave you the option of just having the main course and a carton of milk for 25 cents. So I said, self, I'm just going to buy the main course and the carton of milk. Save myself 15 cents a day. Now, it doesn't sound like much at all, but back in 1967, okay, 15 cents a day, that's 75 cents a week. In 6 weeks, you've got $4.50.
Yep.
And in 36 weeks, at 36 times 75, you've got $27. In 1967, 68, that's pretty darn good money.
Right.
Because then, at the time, my hobby, I wanted to buy military war games, board games they cost $5. So all I had to do was just simply make that simple adjustment, and then I would have the money to buy one of my favorite war games and have that as a hobby. But learning to save, having the incentive to save. And when I was in 8th or ninth grade, two of my friends in junior high, we got together and we formed sort of a little mini business, because down in Tampa, Florida, grass grows fast. And there were lots of lawns and homes that needed to have their lawns cut,
Yep.
hedges trimmed, we marketed ourselves, we put in and we got paid really good money to save those people the trouble of mowing their own lawns or doing that stuff. And I learned the value of hard work and accumulating money. And it's simply that. And learning to, and I applied that lesson to my career. And so right now I have no credit card debt. I have a low mortgage. My wife and I have enough money through my Army pension, my civil service pension, and Social Security to meet all our basic needs, to live a decent quality of life, and basically to work because I want to, not because I have to in order to survive.
So I think there's this conversation that's happening between generations right now about how we should be acting and the things we should be doing to save and to preserve our wealth. And
I would say that the most cost-effective investment right now, especially even though the price of silver is going up quite a bit,
should go up a bit more too.
Oh, yes, there is a lot of upside potential simply because the historical ratio between the value of gold to silver, the historical ratio is it varied between 25 to 40 times, gold 25 to 40 to 1
Right.
gold to silver. The current
And
ratio,
we're way
if you
over
look at
that right now, correct?
it's close to 100.
Yep.
And so therefore what it's telling you and what a number of companies are selling is that silver is greatly undervalued.
Right.
There is a limited supply of silver, yet silver is in very high demand. When you put high demand up against limited supply, that means silver
Increase
is
in
going to
value.
go up. But
Yep.
laws of supply and demand still apply.
Yep.
So I would advise, start stacking silver, and if you get very large amounts of money, stack a little gold with that too, because gold cannot be destroyed.
Absolutely. So to that point, when you say stacking silver, everyone has a different opinion of how to stack their silver. Some people are physical silver, other people are buying into a stock of some kind. What would you do?
The best what I have followed, and which is still very reliable, the best starter investment for silver is to buy junk silver. That's it seems like, but what we are talking about 90% silver dimes, 90% silver quarters, all pre-1965, because the United States stopped putting silver into their coinage with the Silver Coinage Act of 1965. But you can buy this junk silver from places like Money Metal Exchange, APMEX. They will sell it to you. They'll sell it at a premium, obviously,
Right.
but it's still and silver is the most cost-effective investment because it has a much higher upside potential for appreciation. It is much easier for the price of silver to double in value than it is for the price of gold to double in value. For the price of silver, right now the price of silver, they say it's worth about around $60 per ounce.
Right.
Okay.
64 today.
Say what?
64 today.
Marvelous. My wife's going to
You're
be
very
happy about
that.
Oh, yeah. I'm feeling jolly already. But you see my point.
Yeah.
It will be much easier for silver to double in value to 120 or 128
Right.
than it would be for gold at its current value of 4,200 to double in value to $8,400 per ounce.
Right. To your point, I am planning on buying some silver here soon. I was planning on doing it 3 months ago, and I should have. But now it's like, well, it'll be a beginning of the year sort of thing.
The longer you wait, the more you're going to regret it. I would say go to either APMEX, APMEX, or Money Metals Exchange.
Okay.
Those two are very reliable, very reputable, and they believe in great security. And I would say physically holding the precious metals and storing them in a place where no one is likely to get to them very easily. I would not advise storing it in a safe deposit box at your bank.
Yeah.
Because then that can get tricky.
Right.
But if you find a safe storage place for your precious metals, then by all means do so, and you hold on to those precious metals for the long term because it's only going to appreciate. It is not at all likely to drop in value. I mean, gold has held its value for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Back in Roman times, if you had a gold piece, what could you buy with that gold piece? You could buy, with 1 ounce of gold, you could buy the finest toga wardrobe available at the time. You could dress yourself
in a cow, but
excuse me?
maybe not a cow, but I was going to say a cow.
Maybe not a cow. A cow, you could, in theory, you probably could buy a cow. Yeah. But whatever. You could buy it back then.
Yeah.
And, okay, so back then, 1 ounce of gold would buy you a really fine suit.
Yep.
Today, what will 1 ounce of gold buy you? A really fine suit.
Very true.
Possibly 2. But right now, it is precious metals do hold their value over time because their amount is fixed and very slowly expanding. Now, if we were able to, in space exploration, to gain more precious metals and have them shipped to Earth, Well, in theory, it might drop the price some, but you would find other uses for those precious metals.
And this is where our love of Bitcoin comes into play.
Now, Bitcoin, I'm a little bit leery of. I confess to that one. I'm sort of a troglodyte in that sense. I'm very leery of things like Bitcoin. I would tend to advise against that in favor of really gold and silver, and
Yep.
really silver. If you are a man, silver has been referred to as the poor man's gold. Man, it's
Well,
in
then
a
it's
sense,
perfect for me. I'll tell you what, Dr. Lockwood.
hey, yeah, exactly. I mean, in my position, look, I'm a retired guy. The way I increase my wealth, guess what my equity is? Guess what my money producing material is? It's here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is the most
If I
important.
were to if I were to go to work again at my age, I would not insist on any old job just for the sake of gathering a certain fixed salary. I would have a job that I know I would enjoy,
Right.
that I could sustain, and that would not be stressful, but find that perfect sweet spot to where I could continue to do that and achieve the goals that I have for my life and my family. That right now I can meet me and my wife's needs and help certain other people out.
Right.
That's fine. If God wills it and gives me the opportunity and opens the door, I can get a job in which I could make additional money for express purposes of taking care of other goals. At the bare minimum, one of my goals would be making sure that should God decide to take me from this world at a certain time before He takes my wife, I want to make sure that my wife is set. Yeah, that she doesn't have to worry about money or anything else. Make sure she's completely set. She has relatives that could move in with her if I were gone, and then that would be a worthwhile use of my money. If I were to gain, for example, huge amounts of money beyond my expectations, I know, after having thought about it a lot in prayer, where I would plow all of that money if necessary. I would put it into the two Christian churches during my youth that were most responsible for my Christian upbringing. Those two churches, I discovered, they have educational funds for improving their schools, building more schools. So I would go to the leadership of those two churches.
So they're actually properly using their funds instead of just.
They would be most likely, even though we're all fallen, given if they have other Christians around them to supervise the use of that money,
Yep.
for an express purpose of improving and expanding Christian education, that would be the best means for expanding or donating any huge amounts of wealth. And I could leave this world knowing that I did what I was supposed to do.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. Lockwood, I want to be very respectful of your time. You have a Buccaneers game to go watch here shortly.
Oh yeah, 1.5. Go Bucks! Yes, don't drop the ball. Don't drop the ball, Baker.
So Baker's got some well, he's got some big shoes to fill. Frankly, he really really does.
Tom Brady. Oh, yeah, you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Baker wins his first Super Bowl. Says, okay, only 6 more to go before I tie Baker Mayfield. No. I would say that Baker would be overjoyed to have. Yeah, I would say Baker would have achieved his life goal is if he wins 2 Super Bowls while he's with Tampa, he will have won 1 more Super Bowl than Tom Brady. That is a realistic goal.
Yep.
That is an excellent goal for him to have. And if he manages to handle, he's 30 years old. He's 30 years old. So he's got a window.
Right.
And if the coaching staff and everyone else, if they operate together the way they should, and make very good decisions, then Baker has and turns out Baker is a Christian himself. So he's got that going for him.
He's got that going for him as well. That's fantastic.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
So I would say that right now I'm going to concentrate, get ready for that Bucs game and watch that, and see how all the Buccaneers do now that they have all of their weapons back.
I love it. Well, enjoy the game, and I am very much so looking forward to our next conversation.
Well, so are you going to give our viewers a preview of coming attractions? Stay tuned for our next exciting
Stay tuned
episode.
for the next episode. Coming up, we will be discussing the end of the world, end of times, the coming of Jesus Christ, and cryptocurrency with Dr. Jonathan Lockwood.
The end of the world and the end of the second coming of Jesus and cryptocurrency.
Oh my gosh. All of those fun topics.
How are we going to shift? I'm interested to see how you're going to shift gears between those two topics.
The Space Force, and the coming of Jesus Christ, and cryptocurrency. Honestly, plenty of things to discuss. No, I really am. I'm very excited about it, and always appreciate your time.
Well, be sure to because I'm sure you have the means for it. Yep. Be sure to give me some feedback in between those episodes to see how the people that are reacting to this nut job that's on here talking about a space fleet.
This is fantastic. Really, really appreciate your time. We'll talk very soon.
Okay, very good.